May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, doing our bit to help preserve the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths cross his, and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today we have a guest, Michael Stusser. And, Michael has an interesting path. Look, his path crosses Shunryu Suzuki, Kobun, Chino, Chogyam, Trungpa, Ryuho Yamada, Alan Chadwick, the gardener, and Sim Vandren and the Farallones Institute, Nils Home. God, I'm leaving stuff out. UC Santa Cruz, the gardening project. He was in a very interesting commune in the Santa Cruz Mountains. He calls it Joy, I think. His fantastic Osmosis Spa in Fremantle and Sonoma County, which we talk about quite a bit. And, his more recent return to Buddhist practice with, mainly with Jisho Carey Warner in Grayton near Sebastopol. But, he talks about other teachers, Gil Fronsdal, and a woman he's done these retreats with, and tree bathing, or what is it? Anyway, you'll see. Anyway, and I met him when he was the gardener at the Farallones Institute in Occidental California. A really wonderful place. Look, that's all you need to hear. Let's just go straight to the talk with Michael. This is the first podcast I did with the new app I have to make podcasts with my Mac, which this is the first one. And the Mac, it really makes better sound. And I haven't done it because I had such good programs to do podcasts with the PC. But thanks to Jesse Chu, who some of you might remember from Zen Center, who lives around the corner now, he told me about Squadcast. And after a couple of frustrating days, it's a very simple program, but, making stupid mistakes and getting used to it, and spending good Lord, an hour with Michael, not being able to do it right. It was all my fault. I thought it was his, but I didn't say so at the time. But, I assumed it. But the problem was on my end. One thing is because, I had these new settings and things. I forgot to turn the speakers down in my studio, so it was creating echo. And I got rid of. I got that to a tolerable place, I think. Anyway, that's about it. So, look, let's give Michael Stusser a call. You've noticed I've eliminated the pause to meditate. I figure almost 5 years of pause to meditate, 4.5 years of pause to meditate was good, and we've done that enough. But look, you can always hit pause and meditate anytime you want. And it was sort of a gimmick, I guess, anyway. I mean, I even made a separate podcast that was Pause to Meditate because I thought, wow, people are getting together and doing Zazen on Zoom. And I thought, well, since space and time is an illusion, anytime we do zazen, we're doing zazen together with the Buddhas and the patriarchs and our long-lost friends. And so I made the pause to meditate, and then we're meditating together no matter at what point in illusory time you're doing it. And I thought that was neat. And I don't know, maybe you did it, you're going to miss it. But you don't have to miss it. All you have to do is hit pause and meditate. Maybe I'll start doing that. But let's hit pause and meditate for a minute before we start, and then I won't have to have the space. It wasn't very long. But anyway, it's been gone for a little while, and I hope you don't miss it. But like I said, you can also always recreate it with your pause button. Okay, so let's give Michael Stusser a call. Actually, it's not a call anymore. Now it's more like Zoom. And Zoom's no good for recording. It only does one track. You know, both people all parties are on one track. So it's good to have a record of a meeting or something. But, you really need a track, an audio track for the host and one for the guest. So edit it properly. Like if you're talking on top of each other, you can either eliminate one of them or you can move them so that they're not on top of each other anymore, stuff like that. And also, they can be at very different levels, so you can set the levels differently. A number of reasons why multiple tracks are really good and are, to me, necessary. And something else, just a technical thing, that Squadcast does that Jesse said is really helpful is, if your connection gets screwed up, you won't lose your guest because it's not recording it from your computer. It's recording it into their system before it even gets to your computer. So he said, and I've done, podcasts where I lost the guest. I've done them where I lost my track. I've done it when I've lost both of them. But on the this is over a period of over 4.5 years now. What, is that true? No, about 4.5 years. It's only happened a couple of times or something. But when it did, and I lost the host, which is me, I could just go fill it in again. So it just goes, well, I was born in, 1942, and then I put in before it, tell me, Fred, when were you born? That sort of thing. But if you lose the guest, that's it. I look back on, I look back with regret and sadness on things I've lost in this archiving. There's one, and if you have a memory, remember me saying there's one interview I did that I just don't know what happened to it, and that was a long time ago, 13 years ago. But I've always regretted it and missed it, and I keep thinking maybe someday I'll find it. I don't know what happened to it, if I took handwritten notes or if I recorded it. Sometimes I wouldn't get them entered into the archive right away, and then I get to it a little later. But this one I forgot. I just forgot, and when I was reminded of it by the person, I could not find it. Oh, God. That's something I think about. Regrets. I notice, I watch regrets go by, and things that embarrass me. I notice sometimes when somebody dies, I remember embarrassing things or things I regret that had to do with them. And it sometimes those sort of go away after the person dies because I can see that it had no substance, it had no importance to begin with. But at other times, I'm still embarrassed and have regret it. And that's true when it doesn't even involve another person. And that's really unnecessary. I mean, it's all right to have those things in balance, say, or just being a human being, but you don't want it to be plaguing you. That's what Suzuki wrote. She called stones in the air. About worrying about non-existent things. Okay. I got to stop rambling on. Here we go with Michael Stusser. Hi, Michael.
Hey, David. How are you?
Messy officing. It looks lived in and worked in.
That's the place that it is.
So I think this is working. Thank you for being the guinea pig for the first podcast made with Squadcast on my Mac. I want to ask you, what are you up to these days?
God, that's a big one. Quite a lot. I'm still pretty involved, very involved in this business I started 40 years ago. And it's kind of been rebirthed by going through the vicissitudes of the COVID epidemic, and necessarily drew me in at a very intense time to get involved and basically keep the ship from sinking. Mm-hmm. And it's been a totally reinvigoration for both Osmosis and myself. But COVID's getting to be a bit in the rearview mirror, and I'm not getting any younger, so I'm working my way into another relationship to the place.
Yeah. So what is osmosis?
Oh, well, there you go. So Osmosis is a day retreat place that is founded on some core values that are the real foundation of this retreat center. Meaningful work, right livelihood, and shared vision. Those are the cornerstones upon which Osmosis has been built. We have this exquisitely beautiful 5.5 acre property in West Sonoma County with a seasonal creek running the whole distance of the western bank. And we offer a really unique form of heat therapy that I discovered when I was living in Japan about 40 years ago. And then we also have other...
That was 40 years ago, right?
40 years ago, yeah.
To make sure.
So, we're having a blast, really. Our deep intention is to create a meditative environment. That's kind of the thing that got me started with the whole thing. I went over there to Japan to study traditional landscape gardening in the early 80s. And was an apprentice in Kyoto with a fourth generation Japanese landscape family, and was very tested by the rigors of traditional Japanese learning system, which is 7 days a week, very rigorous. And ended up transitioning to living in a Zen monastery.
Which one?
Hoshinji.
Hoshinji in Obama.
In Obamashi, yes.
Yeah.
And so that was certainly a marvelous opportunity, one that I would never have traded for anything in my entire life. And I was participating over a period of a couple of years, visiting periodically to do sesshin. And then my last year, I went to sesshin every month for the year, and ended up moving into the temple for the last 6 months. And it was deep practice, really profound, life-changing for sure. And at the end of it, I got sciatica, probably from sitting too much zazen. And went through a very difficult period of time where I had a crippling case of excruciating pain. Had to leave the monastery, and in my efforts to find healing, ended up stumbling across this thing called, in Japanese, it's called kosoburo, and the direct translation is enzyme bath, but basically it was being buried in a fermenting medium of sawdust, which when I heard about it sounded pretty unappealing, and I was ready to run the other way as fast as I could. But my Japanese hosts were insistent that I do it, and I wasn't in a position to refuse. So I went and had this absolutely profound, life-changing experience in my very first cedar enzyme bath in Japan. It was entirely too hot. I thought I was burning up. The only way that I could figure out how to reconcile the situation, because I was buried very deep and couldn't move, was remembering this thing that we had learned about in training. When you're a hot Buddha, be a hot Buddha. When you're a cold Buddha, be a cold Buddha. And as I uttered those words to myself, I was released from the intensity of my reaction to the heat, and suddenly found myself experiencing something like you're not supposed to think about or hope about when you're meditating. And the Japanese say that you can't learn anything unless you're totally miserable. And I was experiencing something so intensely pleasurable that I had this huge release, and was cascading through the universe at the speed of light. A peak experience on par with anything I've ever had in my life. And in a millisecond of that experience, I saw myself bringing this incredible treatment back to Sonoma County. It was visual. It was very real. In a fragment of a second of this experience that I was having, but it was totally convincing. There was no doubt in my mind this is what I was supposed to do. And so that's how I got on the path of starting Osmosis. And as romantic as that sounds, it was a real slog. When I came back to the States, I hadn't lived here for years. Everybody thought that I'd lost my marbles when I told them what I was trying to do. But, a few people were really interested in helping me. One of them was Silas Hoadley. You remember Silas?
Oh, very well.
So he was a real bodhisattva, and pitched in and helped me out. I mean, he put on his tool belt. He helped me build the first place.
Is that right? Oh.
Yes, he did. Mm-hmm. And just gave me some sage advice in a very down-to-earth way, and encouraged me when the chips were down. And ended up building the original place out of recycled wood from a chicken coop. And just couldn't let go of the vision, and gradually started seeing people. I would go down to Marin County with this little book of pictures and invite people to come up, and at that point it was the mid-'80s. AIDS was on. A lot of people were really freaked out about bat houses and stuff, so it was tricky getting going. But people loved the bath. They loved the place we built. And Steve Stuckey helped me build this wonderful garden around it. He and I kind of had a parallel track. Steve left Zen Center about the same time I went to Japan to study landscape gardening and get a contractor's license. So he could pay the rent of what it costs to live in California. Mm-hmm. Plus he liked gardening, and he wanted to find a vocational way to extend, his gardening path. And the same was true for me. I had been involved in the whole Chadwickian organic gardening thing for a decade, both living on a commune and then teaching at Farallones Institute. And when I made this initial visit to Japan, my eyes were opened to the incredibly evocative power of the Japanese garden. And I was sitting on the porch of one of these fabulous gardens in Kyoto in December, and it was after tourist season, no one else was there, staring out into this landscape garden, looking at these beautifully placed stones, and wow, getting a whole deep feeling of the meditative experience that was intended by the guy who had created this garden 800 years ago. And it was a big aha for me. I got, well, part of the reason it's so hard for us to get established in any kind of a grounded meditation practice in the United States is because we don't have any cultural forms to help support it, to help suggest it. And I just thought, wow, this would be a very inspiring way to take my interest in gardening and take it from being what it had been for me up to this point, which was about soil building and composting and healthy food, healthy people, to looking at the garden on the horizon, on the land and the landscape, and what it could do for the spirit. And Alan Chadwick used to talk about that, but I never quite understood it. And so it came through for me. And so that's what inspired me initially to go to Japan. And then I got invited later on this short visit to Japan to become an apprentice gardener, because I went to Yamada Muman Roshi's temple on New Year's Day at the invitation of this woman who was helping me as sort of the intermediary to set up my apprenticeship. And I was staying in Richard Baker's house, the one that before that had been Gary Snyder's house.
Oh, yeah. Nakamura Sensei's.
Yeah, and it's not far from Myoshinji.
Right.
So Priscilla invited me to go over there on New Year's.
Priscilla Storant, Chisan?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I went over there, and while I was waiting to meet Yamada Muman Roshi, the head monk came in, and Priscilla told him that I was a gardener. So the monk said, well, you should meet our gardener. So, New Year's Day is a very auspicious day for the Japanese, has special meaning. Anything that happens on New Year's Day is considered to be very important.
This was New Year's Day you were going to meet him?
Yeah. Yes.
Wow. That's I would think he'd be busy, but...
Oh, he was. He was seeing a lot of people.
Uh-huh.
And while I was waiting, I got introduced to their gardener. And Ruho, he came in, and within a few sentences, he said, well, I would like to invite you to be my apprentice. Like, what is this? I didn't know what to make out of it. But 6 months later, I was back in the States, sitting in the Santa Cruz Mountains, wondering what I was supposed to do next in my life. And I remembered this invitation. I thought, I wonder if this guy was serious. So I sent him a letter. Said, did you really mean it? Is there anything to this? And wow, just like boom, letter comes out. Absolutely, I have a place for you to stay. I want you to come. You can be my apprentice. And so that's what got me started on my way over there to Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was epic. I went to a year-long course in Japanese that was concentrated into a summer program up at UW. And
UW?
University of Washington.
Uh-huh.
And I was in a class with a bunch of people. I was 35 at the time. I was in a class with a bunch of brilliant young linguists. And I was the dunce of the class. And I tried really hard, but it was tough. And then when the course was over, I sold my 64 Ford Fairlane station wagon, and it was just enough money to buy a one-way ticket to Japan. And I got off the plane I couldn't remember what's a word of Japanese.
I'm going to close the door here because
Yeah, yeah.
our little doggy. You went your first treatment of the osmosis technique of the enzyme bath. It healed your sciatica.
It did. Yes, it did.
How fast?
Well, I did it twice a day for a week.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really hard to trust that I was better because I had been so bad. But I was. I was fine. It was really unbelievable because I had gone through, a period of months of being in excruciating pain just about all the time. There was no comfortable position to sleep in.
Oh, wow. I remember you talking about it when you came back and talking about wanting to start osmosis, and I didn't think you were crazy.
Well,
I loved doing it. I miss it.
well, I wish you were in the neighborhood, then you could come.
Yeah. All right. Well, so where were you born?
I was born in Seattle, Washington at the Swedish hospital.
Ah. Well, you and I have so many overlapping experiences and influences in our life. And I'd sort of like to touch on as many of them as we could, but I'd sort of like to know what was your trajectory to getting into everything you got into, Zen and gardening, and well, we know how you got into gardening here. Well, not really. How you met Alan Chadwick and just everything. How does it get there?
So I sort of count my life as really beginning when I left Los Angeles to go to the university at Santa Cruz in the 60s. I moved from Seattle, Washington to South Dakota, where my mother was from, when I was 4, and then I moved to Southern California when I was 10. And then I graduated from junior college down there and transferred to Santa Cruz. And while I was at Santa Cruz, wow, everything happened. But I did meet Alan Chadwick as a student there. And
What year?
Oh, probably 67. When he first came, he came to the campus to visit a friend of his from Europe who was staying there, Eugen Rosenstock Jussi. And when he came, he met Paul Lee, who was my philosophy professor.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul invited him to give a talk about his idea for a garden. And he showed up in the library at Cal College wearing white shorts and a white shirt. And, he's a Shakespearean actor and brilliant elocution. He was a genius. Mm-hmm. And he gave this absolutely incredible talk about the institutional imposition on the landscape. The university buildings, how, just basically crass it was. There was no landscaping or any sense of connection to the... And he talked about the beautiful gardens that could be built on this campus. And he was so enthusiastic and inspiring. And both my roommate and I were really taken in by Alan. Only problem was he served champagne, which was not legal to serve champagne to the students in the university library, and he got in trouble. And then the academics were really a little bit put off because he was a bit of a Pied Piper, and a lot of the students were dropping out of the school to help him in the garden. And he was in...
Well, wait a minute. You just made a leap. All of a sudden, he's working on a garden How did that come about?
There's some big steps in between. Yeah. So what happened was they couldn't hire him because he wasn't a credentialed academic, but he really wanted to be there. So the only way that he could legally be on the campus and do what he wanted to do was to become a student. So he had to apply as a student, and so when he went to meet the bursar to pay the fee, he handed the bursar the money, and the bursar handed it back to him under the table.
Huh. Wow.
So, so anyway, it was finally sanctioned so that he could start the garden, and he picked the most unlikely spot, this incredibly steep hill. But it was right in the middle of the campus, and it had a beautiful south exposure. So even in the winter when the sun was really low in the sky, it got great sun exposure. And but it was covered with poison oak. And my roommate and I agreed to help him, begin to prepare the ground during the summer when all the students were gone. So he had us out there every day picking the poison oak out of this hillside. And it was just absolutely incredible getting to know this, deeply cultured European man who had traveled the world and had so many incredible stories to tell. And, every day we'd stop for tea right on time in the afternoon, and he showed us exactly how to make the tea. He was a totally amazing gourmet. And then other people started to come, and we'd take turns bringing food for the lunch. So one day it was my turn to bring something for lunch. So I brought this loaf of Wonder Bread, and with the blue and white spots on it, and red the red and blue spots on the white wrapper. Do you remember Wonder Bread?
Right.
So I give it to Alan Chadwick. He takes it into his hands. He looks at it. He gets this very ironic smirk on his face. He ceremoniously undoes the tie, takes the loaf out of the package, and then he goes and compresses it down into a little ball and throws it as far as he can.
That's great.
And, this was his way of teaching, his way of just being the incredible character that he was. Needless to say, that was the most profound lesson I ever learned about Epicurean.
Wow.
It was a crash course, right? So, Alan was a rigorous taskmaster and created an absolutely incredible garden at the university, and a lot of students were involved. He grew a profusion of flowers, and we gave them all away. We had this flower stand, and all the cars as they left the campus could stop by this stand, and we had it just full of cans of copious amounts of cut flowers. So it was really a transformative, revolutionary thing to have this garden in the middle of the campus and giving away all this abundance. And we delivered baskets full of vegetables, fresh every morning, to the chancellor's back porch. And so his wife loved us, so he loved us.
Oh, wow. I met him that summer because Paul Lee brought him to Tassajara. And that was our first year at Tassajara. And I met him at the swimming pool, and I went up to him and said, "Mr. Chadwick?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "My name is David Chadwick." And he stood up and said, "Well, then certainly, sir, we must be related." And Richard Baker asked him to start the gardens at Tassajara. Well, he was too busy to do that. But they said, well, maybe sometime in the future.
Yeah.
So how long were you involved with him there at Santa Cruz, and were you there when he left?
I was involved in the garden for probably about 2 years. I actually got a study thing, so I was actually paid to work in the garden, and but I got to know Alan well, and a lot of the people who continued on for a long time. And then I graduated, and and then of course what happened after that is they started the farm on the much larger property on the lower part, and started the agroecology program, which is it become a globally known program in training hands-on horticulturalists. And
But
then, go ahead.
at some point, the school terminated his relationship,
You're right.
right?
He never lasted very long any place because he was a very temperamental person who was subject to excesses of rage.
Well, when you say excesses, you mean temperamental excesses, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But you said that went on to have a formidable agricultural program at the school. With who leading it?
Well, his key apprentice who emerged from the many, well, there were several amazing apprentices who went on to establish all kinds of important garden projects, but the lead one was Steve Kafka, and he was the one who kind of took over the leadership of the garden program after Alan was excommunicated from the university, and was able to parlay the success of the garden into starting the farm project on the lower part of the campus.
Now, my understanding is that Paul Lee and Paige Smith quit because of Alan's being fired.
Well, Paul Lee had to leave the university. He could not get tenure, and there were some issues with Paul, and he was basically fired from the university, and that's why Paige Smith quit. Paige Smith quit because of what happened to Paul.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Wow. And Paige Smith was like their most prestigious teacher. He was an American, our professor, American historian.
Yes, he was
of note.
Absolutely. Paige Smith was an incredible figure in the history of UC Santa Cruz. Basically, he and Dean McHenry were from UCLA, and they kind of were really the foundational figures in leading the creation of the Santa Cruz campus. And,
well, so where'd you go after that?
After I left the university, I graduated. I went to Europe with the backpack for a while, and then I came back and was invited to start the gardens at the Farallones Institute with Sim Van Dryn and David Katz, and that's when I met you. And so we well, wait, there's a missing chapter. No, I'm sorry. After I left, first I went and lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains for 5 years and did the Camp Joy Garden. And that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yes. So that was like 1970. I went up there and was able to be part of this Back to the Land community that was so soulful and righteous, and it was on 5 acres in Boulder Creek, and the land was given to us basically by this woman who had read about Alan Chadwick's garden in Sunset Magazine and sent a letter to the university saying, I want to have a garden like this on my property. And it had been pinned to the bulletin board in Alan's little chalet house for months and months and months, and Alan never did anything with it. So Jim Nelson picked it up and responded to this woman Her name was Cressy Digby, and she opened the place up to us and let us live on the property, and we built this incredible garden, and ended up providing us with a little outhouse and a barn and a water hookup, and it was so generous of her. And then after 5 years, we got in trouble with the county, and they were trying to evict us, and we had to build a code house to be able to stay on the property. So we got a deal to buy for $1 an army barrack on Angel Island. And this was a barrack that was built for troops going overseas in World War II. That was 80 feet long, 40 feet wide, 2 stories tall. It was built right after Pearl Harbor. We took the whole thing away in 7 weeks. We demolished it board by board, nail by nail, moved all the wood down to Camp Joy using landing crafts to get the wood off the island, and built a code house to satisfy the county. And then we got a benefactor to buy the property, and it's been held in trust ever since.
Ah, that's wonderful. And then how did you get involved with the Farallones Institute, as you pointed out, which was founded by Sim Vanderen, who died very recently?
Yes, this year. No, he died, yes, in the last month or two. So what happened there was that there was another commune in the neighborhood of Camp Joy that was owned by this young man who had inherited a very large sum of money. And his commune was kind of the opposite of ours, because everyone was pretty involved in taking a lot of LSD, and there wasn't that much collaboration going on, and they weren't really stewarding the place, and they didn't really have a garden, and he wanted his property to be taken care of the way ours was, so he was kind of leaning on us to see if we could help direct traffic over there, or at least provide some inspiration. And he had this idea that he wanted to start an institute that could help educate people on how they could evolve the tools necessary to live independently of big government and big business. This was like in '73 during the oil shock, and Small is Beautiful, and when the Club of Rome was coming out with Small is Beautiful, you have Schumacher, all this stuff was kind of brewing, and he was picking up on it and feeling that there needed to be some kind of an institute that could actually help bring about those changes, right? So he decided that he would form the institute, and he invited his favorite university professors from UC Berkeley. So that included Sim and the Okowskis, who were etymologists, and this biologist, and a great crew of people, the ones who had inspired him as a student. But after 6 months, he realized they were all armchair intellectuals, and they were never going to really do anything. So he said, I want to invite some people with dirt under their fingers. So he invited David Katz, who was running a working farm called Odyssey Orchards at the time, and myself from Camp Joy to join the board of directors of the Farallones Institute. So I never forget walking into our first meeting with all these professors, and their greeting was, what are your credentials? And I said, well, I work with Alan Chadwick. And then, of course, the subtext on that, this is a guy who believes in astrology, and
Yeah, he's a Steiner. He was a Steiner gardener, right?
Exactly. He was actually personally tutored by Rudolf Steiner as a child.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. His mother was an aristocrat, and set that up for him.
And Alan Did you all plant by the moon?
Oh yeah, are you kidding? Everything, totally.
Yeah.
The whole 9 yards. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we got invited to be on the board, and then the first project was the Integral Urban House in Berkeley.
The Integral Urban House in Berkeley
Yes.
happened after you got, but wasn't the Farallones land in
Occidental.
near Occidental, wasn't that there first?
No, other way around.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I forgot that.
Yeah, so that was a hugely successful project. That was the first project of Farallones Institute, and that was to demonstrate the potential for urban self-sufficiency in a regular home-sized lot. And Harlow, this wealthy young man, bought just a residential house on 4th Street there in Berkeley. Nothing fancy. And the whole thing was completely made over with solar collectors and a composting toilet and chicken coop and a biointensive garden. And I mean, it was like absolutely revolutionary. And the Sierra Club did a book on it. It was a bestseller. They had busloads of school kids going through there for years.
Yeah, I was there. It was great. Yeah.
And so that was an enormously inspiring project. But, we on the board decided, well, what we really want to do is establish a rural community where we can all live and build a transformative example of what culture could be from the ground up. And that was the inspiration for the Occidental place. So we kind of rode the wave of the Integral Urban House into, so it was technically an appropriate technology center, right?
Right.
But then it became a whole lot more than that, as all the cast of characters assembled there, and the synergy was so powerful, and it was
right.
It was
right. Yeah, it was a great place to visit. And good food.
Good food, good times.
Yeah, and Andrew Atkinson was. Isn't that where he got into No, he got into blacksmithing through Alex Wagers. He did blacksmithing there.
That's right. And Niles Holmes was is instrumental person in helping shape the culture there.
Oh, Nils?
Oh yeah, he was one of the first people on the scene. He built some of the first buildings.
Oh yeah, right.
He'd come and gone by the time I got there. I hardly had a chance to get to know him. But he's certainly a legendary character from the early days of Farallones.
And David Katz's brother,
Benny.
what was he? He had this shack or something. He was doing something. I can't remember what.
He had a pottery studio there.
Pottery, right?
So he made all the tiles for the houses out of the clay on the property, and threw pots and.
And so how long? And you lived there, and I remember you from there. I remember how into gardening you were, and you talking about it. And that was what year?
I was there from 75 to 1980.
So we talked about Alan Chadwick. I was the work leader at Green Gulch Farm when Alan was there. Actually, he was there before me. He was there in 72, and I was there in 73. And he got, he was happy to see me at first, but it got to be where he just glare at me when he saw me, because I had to have people working on certain things and organized it. And he thought of everybody at Green Gulch should stop and play volleyball at a certain time or do something else. And I didn't get angry or oppose him or anything, but I just wasn't part of his trip, But he was so great what he did. He was such a free spirit. And, you know, he'd get these ideas like to have peacocks, right? So then we had peacocks at Greencoat and, other things. He was something. So I met you there at Farallones. How long were you at Farallones?
5 years. I was 5 years at Camp Joy and 5 years at Farallones.
Is that right?
And in parallel to that time, I was also developing a very important connection to practice.
Yeah, let's hear about that. How did that get going?
Well, my first real contact with it was meeting Suzuki Roshi at Paul Lee's house somewhere around 67, 68, where Richard Baker brought him over to, he was friends with Paul Lee, and Paul Lee was teaching a class on lifestyle, and he had students over to his house one night to meet two very different kinds of people. One was a political activist named Paul Jacobs, who had done a huge amount of work on the injustice to the Native American populations who were working in the uranium mines and how lethal it was for them. And he ended up dying of radiation poisoning. But he was a major activist, had a lot to say. He was a very, robust, dynamic character. So he was in one room, and that's where most of the students were. Then in the other room is Suzuki Roshi. And Suzuki Roshi is just sitting there pretty quietly, not saying or doing too much of anything. And so I go in there, and there's only one other person in the room, and it's this young woman, a student, who's pregnant. And he's trying to counsel her a little bit, and I'd never seen anybody like this before. And at the time, it did not compute, but it had a deep impression on me because of his contentment and his composure. Something was communicated. And it wasn't like I was running out of the room going, oh my God, I met a guru. No. But there was something that just came through that was memorable, and I didn't know how to metabolize it at that point in my life. But so that was one touch point. And then, far more significant one occurred on my 24th birthday when I came back from my backpacking chapter after graduating from college, and ran into Trungpa Rinpoche 10 blocks from the house I grew up in Los Angeles on a Sunday morning. There was a group of people who had once a month a visitor from some different spiritual tradition talk in their house. And it was Trungpa Rinpoche's 10th day in the United States.
Oh.
And he was there with Diane, and, she was a teenager basically. And he was wearing a white shirt and a tie with his shaved head. And he gave a talk in the dining room talking about...
shaved head. Trungpa had a shaved head?
He did.
Wow, that was early on.
Yeah, it was literally his 10th day in the United States. He'd come down from Canada. And he talked about the Tibetan diaspora and how it was perceived as such a tragedy by many, but in his view, it was the spreading of the Dharma and the beginning of the Aquarian Age. A very, big picture kind of story that was fascinating. And then we went into the kitchen for lunch, and it was TV dinners at these little tables. So, and like I had no idea what a toku was or any of this stuff, so I was just pretty brazenly asking him, ignorant questions. And I had just come back from Formentera in Spain, where it was kind of the crossroads of the international hippie scene, and everybody was dropping acid, and that was where Joni Mitchell and other people had little enclaves that they would go to. And so he was curious about all that, and so we just had this very kind of jocular, fun conversation. And then when it was over, the people hosting said, well, if anybody would like to receive meditation instruction, you can go in the living room. So 6 of us went in the living room. He gave us meditation instruction, and then he asked if anybody wanted to learn the great mantra, and a few of us said, yeah. We raised our hands, so he taught us, Om Mani Padme Hum, and kind of getting into it, right? And then they said, well, would anybody like to have audience? I had no idea what that meant, but gone this far, I might as well finish the deal, right? So it's my turn. He's in one of the back bedrooms, so I go back there, and I walk into the room, and that Bob Dylan song, something's happening, but you don't know what it is. Mr. Jones, right? Well, it's kind of like that, because I walk in, and it was a very different human being sitting in there that I had just been having this casual conversation with. And I'd never experienced anything like it before. He was looking straight through me, and I felt so naked and exposed. And so he started asking me questions, and it was basically feedback on how I had comported myself in my conversations with him earlier. So in a mocking way, he asked me the same way I asked him, how old are you? it kind of went like that, right? Mm-hmm. And it was just feedback in a very peculiar way. And I walked out of the room, and I felt so different. And I walked out onto the porch to put my shoes on, and I had these boots that had a lot of laces, and they were a pain in the ass to take on and off. And I was always so rushed and annoyed about the effort that it took to take these shoes on and off. I'm sitting there lacing up my shoes like I'm on LSD, and it's the only thing happening in the world. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it was an important meeting for sure. I've never forgotten it. And I got his book, Meditation in Action, and I read it like over and over again. And then I went on to live on the hippie commune up in Santa Cruz Mountains at Camp Joy. And while I was living there, I discovered the Zendo down in Santa Cruz. And I met...
What Zendo in Santa Cruz?
Santa Cruz Zendo. Kobun Chino Zendo.
Yeah. So, let's hear about that.
So, the first time I was in there, I walked in there, and we were sitting on and I remember the smell of the zabutons. No, the smell of the what do you call the tatami mats? Excuse me. He had tatami mats in there, and as a smell I'd never smelled before. So that was stage one, exotic kind of, right? And then the smell of the incense. So I'm sitting there, and then I didn't know anything about Zazen. I was just trying to imitate everybody, but I was sitting on a cushion, and I had a really bad posture. I was slumped over really, a lot. So then Kobun comes in quietly. We're all facing the wall. And he comes up to me, and he gently puts his hand on my back and just very ever so gently presses on it until I'm sitting up straight. And then he goes to the front of the room, and then we all turn around for the service. And he had that, what do you call that stick with the curve on it that he holds?
Nyoi.
Yeah. So he had
The
that.
teacher's stick.
Pardon?
It's a teacher's stick.
Yeah, yeah. So then he started doing the prostrations on the, just bowing down like, with such sincerity. I was so moved by him. And honestly, I could hardly understand his talks. But just sitting there was like being with him was what it was about. And then so that was a touch point for me, and I went there infrequently, but I remember going there one day when it was locked and there were some books on the porch, and I picked up this book about Dogen Zenji and I started reading it. And basically it got me about 2 or 3 pages into it, and it was just this total compelling thing, about give up everything, follow the way, nothing's more important. And I was like, oh my God, I think I should do this, It was so compelling. I remember that.
Was it a small book?
It was kind of a regular sized book. I wish I knew which one it was, because wow, I would love to find it again, which one it was. And then when I left Camp Joy, it was kind of like getting a divorce. It was very upsetting what happened, and some of us had to leave because of a schism that took place, and I went to ended up going to Central America and living in Guatemala at Lake Atitlan, and while I was there, I went to get some mail, and there was a flyer from the Naropa Institute. I'll never know how I got that, but I did. And during that time, I also had Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and I read it from cover to cover and started meditating just based on reading that book in Guatemala. And then I get the flyer for Naropa Institute, and I just gotta go. Packed up everything. I was pretty penniless. I had to hitchhike and take buses, and I just went to Boulder because I had to go. And on my last ride getting into Boulder, I got my thumb out, and this father and son picked me up, and we're driving, and it's kind of stormy weather, and we get to the top of the last hill before you go down into Boulder, and there's this gigantic rainbow. I mean, it's one of the biggest rainbows I've ever seen. All the cars are pulling off the road. So we stop the car, we get out of the car to look at the rainbow. And right under the rainbow, perfectly centered, is this gigantic billboard for a real estate development in Boulder. And what it says is, "This is it." It's crazy how this stuff happens sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So, down the hill I went into Boulder, and my intention was I really wanted to do 2 things. Really learn the history of Buddhism and get established in meditation practice, and be able to be in the presence of Trungpa, who had such an influence on me just based on that one meeting and reading his book. And so I spent that whole summer in Naropa Institute, and it was incredible. I mean, we had the School for Disembodied Poets, and Allen Ginsberg was there, and every time that Trungpa talked, about 1,500 people would gather. And his lectures that summer were absolutely astounding. They were so speaking to the center of your heart. And when the talks were over, people would walk out, and this happened again and again, not once, not twice. We'd look at each other, and people would say, "I felt like he was talking directly to me." But everybody felt that. just the synchronicity and the timing, and it was so powerful, so powerful.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot at Zen Center with Suzuki. Yeah.
So so I ended up staying afterwards, and I got a job working up at the Rocky Mountain Dharma Center at 8,500 feet north of Boulder, and he came there, gave a couple of Da Tunes 10-day retreats in a big circus tent, and Werner Erhard came to one of them, and
Oh, is that right?
yeah, and there was this guy there named Bill Powell, who had done the stonework at Tassajara.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
So he was there. And Trungpa had tasked him to build a special garden with stones. And he had selected these two big stones on top of a mountain, one to represent the female principle and one to represent the male principle. And the people who were in charge of the center at that time, this couple, if I could remember their name, you would know them because they were from Zen Center.
Richard and Alice?
Yes.
Hatsberry.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they really wanted this garden to be what Trungpa wanted it to be. And they had rented all this really expensive equipment to try to move these rocks down there. And they couldn't figure out how to do it, you know, and they were getting really worked up about it. And so Bill had an idea, and he got this, there was a dead Chevy Nova, and we took the hood off of it and took it up there and chained it onto the back of a pickup truck and kind of rocked the rock with a pry bar onto the, hood of that car, and then just drug it down the mountain.
That's what we did at Tassajara.
Yeah, he knew what to do, right?
Yeah.
So,
I'm not sure if it was, I think it might have been the top of a car that was left on the road, and that Paul Disco got the whole top cut off before the road crew buried the car in the road. They had this big one. They just dig a giant hole and put the car in it, cover it up, put the road over it.
So the cool thing was that to stabilize the rock, I stood on top of it as he pulled it down the hill. So I surfed the rock down the hill.
Oh, it's frightening.
That was fun. I loved it.
Wow.
So then we're positioning these two rocks in this gravel yard, right? And Bill is fussing with them and moving them these little micro movements because he wants to get the relationships to them just right. And he's almost done, and he pushes on it, and the bigger rock, the female rock, cracked and broke in half.
Really?
Yeah. And Richard and his wife freaked out. They were just so traumatized that what's Trungpa, they totally lost it. So Kobun was there at the time, leading a retreat, and he said to Bill and I, let's go over here. I think I can help you out with this situation. So he gave us a recipe of how to repair the rock.
Oh, really?
And he told us how to grind up some other stones that looked just like that stone. And then he gave us a recipe to mix them with some other ingredients so that we could glue them back together again.
No shit.
So that it would never even be noticed that there was a crack in it. And it freaking worked, man.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very impressive.
Yeah, in the meantime, all the people there were drinking like fish.
Yeah.
And my job was kind of the guy who drove around and picked up the garbage and stuff, and brought back retreatants, because they had these little retreat cabins. And Alan Ginsberg was there for a retreat, and it was my job to go and pick him up when he was done. So I drive up there, and he's been on retreat for a week. He comes running out of the cabin like a banshee, jumps in the pickup truck and pulls open the ashtray to see if there's a cigarette butt in there.
Yeah. That would happen. Pardon me, at Stusser, when the road was out. All the cars that were parked there, there were only a handful of real smokers, but they'd go through all the ashtrays. And I have been known to do that too.
So my job was also to go to town and buy all the provisions. So they'd give me this whole list of everything to buy to the kitchen, and I'd go to the different stores to get the grains and this and that. And then on the way out of town, I would stop at this liquor store to buy the liquor order. Bottles and bottles of all kinds of hard liquor.
Jesus Christ.
And I'd write it out on the check. And yet they had these beautiful checks, the Rocky Mountain Dharma Center with pictures of mountains and snow. And it was like, super high class looking check. And I tender the check at the liquor store, and all the guys are going, yeah, right?
Well, that's an aspect of Trumpa's lineage that did not continue. The whole thing with alcohol.
It was not good. I mean,
no, it was bad.
It was really bad. I mean, while I was there at Rocky Mountain Dharma Center, somebody had a nice Volvo, and they rolled off the road totally drunk, destroyed the car. Luckily, they didn't get hurt. Somebody in a drunken domestic dispute fell out of a 2-story building. Fortunately, they weren't hurt either, but
Mm-hmm.
But I had some amazing things happen, and I was like really studying the Dharma very intently, doing a lot of sitting and studying the texts, and I really wanted to have audience with Trungpa after my first, because I never had a personal encounter with him again after that initial one. So, and everybody wanted to have audience with Trungpa, and good luck on getting it, right? So I was encouraged to really think carefully about what I was going to ask him when I met him. And in the meantime, part of my job was to wash the dishes there. And I had these huge plantar warts all over my hands. I mean, they were super ugly, and lots of them. And I was, deep into Dharma study, trying to think of, questions that I could ask out of what I was studying. And then one night I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask him about these warts.
Uh-huh.
And I thought to myself, that's a good idea. I woke up the next morning. They were almost all gone.
Wow.
Yeah.
You hadn't asked him yet?
No, but I'd formed the intention that I was going to.
Uh-huh.
And then I had a second thing happen that was equally psychically kind of crazy. I took a short trip down to New Mexico to visit a friend and stayed there for about a week. And I started having, how you can just obsess on some crazy-ass idea in your mind. And I was saying, well, I'm going back to Boulder, and it's going to be Thanksgiving. I'd like to have Thanksgiving with Trungpa. I started thinking that, and I started wanting that to happen. And then, so they had this this sorority house that they had purchased called Marpa House. It was a dormitory for students there.
Yeah.
And when I went back, I was living there, and there was a big Thanksgiving dinner in the mess hall on the ground floor, you know. So I'm sitting there, I don't know, there was over 100 people, and it's Thanksgiving dinner, and all the plates were served out, and everybody's just getting ready to chomp down on it. And all of a sudden there's this noise and crashing and banging. These big doors on this patio open up. It's really cold outside, and Trungpa and David Rome come in, and Trumpa's really drunk. They're kind of holding him up, you know. And he looks around the room, and then he makes a beeline right over and sits down next to me.
Mm.
And I was like, I was just flabbergasted. And we exchanged a few words, and I offered him some food, and he wasn't interested. And then he got up and he left. And I started following. I said, "Hey, I thought I was going to see you tonight." I needed to say that to him, you know, and I wanted him to hear me, and because I wanted to share the story, right? And he just said, "What?" Very dismissively, you know. And I asked him 3 different times, and then I realized, yeah, he knew. You know, it was just a crazy thing.
Huh.
Well,
So, you know, in terms of time, you were at the Joy Place in near Boulder Creek, and then you left there, and you went to Central America, and you went to Naropa, but also there's from the Joy Place you got involved with Farallones Institute.
Well, at that time we were visiting. Before I left, we had decided we were going to pursue this idea of creating a community, and we needed to find the place to do it. So every month, the board of directors would meet at a different place to scope it out.
Board of directors of what?
Of Farallones Institute,
Yeah.
because I had joined it, right? And our meetings were held each month on a different piece of real estate that Sim was scoping out as a potential center, right? So I attended some of those meetings before I left, and then when I came back, they had found Occidental and started it. And so when Sim heard I was coming back, he said, "Well, will you be the gardener in Occidental?" And I said, "Sure. Sounds good to me." Because I had to bail on the Trungpa scene when the Merwin Institute happened. That was the last straw for me. I had to get out of there.
Oh, tell us about that.
Well, it was such a high energy time, and then the season was over for Naropa, and then he had his seminary.
Trungpa had a seminary.
Yeah, and the thing that's most talked about is the Merwin Institute incident. But the other thing that happened that I've never seen written about was that a 6-year-old child died there because he had a really high fever, and the parents were so taken up in the trauma and just what was happening. I mean, they were making people wait. Trungpa would make people wait for hours and hours and hours in a room for him to show up for a teaching. And
Yeah, right.
anyway,
You're talking about Ken Campbell's son?
I don't know who the people's names were, but it was a 6-year-old boy. I was there when it happened.
Yeah, and the mother was just, oh man. I think this was Ken Campbell's son. Yeah.
So they brought the child in open casket into the shrine room, and they had a big, and Trungpa came, and he said, this is not a time for sentiment. That was, I don't know, it's just hard for me to understand what was...
He said, this is not a time for sentiment?
Yeah.
If it was Ken Campbell's son, I didn't know, or I don't remember his wife, but my memory is that Trungpa could not console her.
Yeah, I wasn't... I was sitting in the back of the room, and I didn't know these people, and they were all at seminary when it happened. So this was, they came out of seminary to have this ceremony in Boulder. But that was kind of the straw that broke it for me. I just couldn't feel comfortable hanging in there anymore with what was going on.
But tell about the Merwin Institute. How did you experience that?
Well, it happened. What I heard about it, I didn't experience it. It was at seminary.
Oh, you didn't experience it? But
no, this
you
was
were there. Were you there?
No, that was at seminary. That was for the advanced students. I was just, one of the people who came to Neurope Institute.
Well, I mean, but people should know what it was. There was a party, and Trungpa had everybody get naked.
No,
right?
I know what happened, but I didn't really realize that part of the story in any kind of detail until after I had left the whole thing and read about it.
Right, and so he said, "Where's Merwin?" Who's this poet who was part of the disembodied poetics thing?
Oh yeah, they drug him out of his room. There was smashed glass, and they brought him in.
And Loring Palmer, who's the most gentle person on earth, was one of the people assigned to get him. And Merwin broke a bottle and slashed Loring in the face. And there was enormous repercussions from that.
Yeah. Well, I think that was right at the same time that this young boy died. And that I didn't even know the rest of the story about Merwin and all of that. But, just being present in that, when they brought the boy in and had the ceremony, something wasn't lining up for me. I had to leave. Plus, I was friends with this woman who he came on to. And
who Trungpa came on to.
Yeah. And she and I both figured it out. Like, we were serious Dharma students, and we were getting to know each other pretty well, and just like Sangha, comparing notes on our learnings. And she said, "You know what? I gotta leave." And I said, "Yeah, me too." So we left together.
Oh, that's interesting, because my experience with Trumpa's group were that the women being his consort for the evening was an honor and was wide open. It was no secret at all. And women would talk about it.
No, she did not appreciate the advance. She was not interested in being that person. It was, not cool with her. She was like, "I am out of here," And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm out of here too. So let's plan our escape from the cult together."
Yeah.
So we did. We drove back out to California. We got a car, and we barely had enough money, and we were down to $20, and we lost it in a laundromat in Nevada.
You lost your only $20?
Our last $20 to buy gas. And then somehow we found it again after a couple of hours, and we just barely made it back,
So, and then that's when you started living at Farallones?
Yeah. Yes. That was when I started living in Farallones after I left Naropa.
Well, how was it at Farallones?
Oh, it was like the first time I went there, I hitched there on a November night, and I'd never been to this part of Sonoma County, and I'd driven over a lot of parts of California, but I had never been out in this area before. And I think I got to Rohnert Park. I was hitchhiking up from Santa Cruz. It was a rainy night. Some guy picked me up in Rohnert Park, and he wasn't going out here, but he drove me all the way out here.
Oh, that's a long way.
Yeah, on a cold, rainy night. Really nice guy, super friendly. And I was warmly welcomed by Karen Katz. The loveliest people ever. And yeah, and I had the winter to figure out how to become a garden teacher. I mean, I had a lot of experience, but I'd never taught gardening. And yeah, that was an absolutely incredible experience living at Farallones for 5 years. It was.
That's good.
It was really exciting, and I got to build out, a huge. I had a lot of responsibility, and that's why. And then I met. There was a lot of exchange between Green Gulch and Farallones, and I met. A lot of people working on the farm, and I became good friends with Bruce and Chris and Steve, of course, and Gil Fronsdale and Mark Lesser, and a lot of people working on in the fields at Green Gulch would come up to Farallones, and we would exchange plants and war stories on supplying the food for a community kitchen, and then it was funny, and then we'd go out for dinner and everybody wanted to eat meat because they couldn't eat meat at Green Gulch. Oh, and Norman, of course, and I got to know Norman, and
Norman Fisher. When you said Bruce and Chris, that's Fortin. Yeah.
And Steve Stuckey, of course, and Gil Fronsdale, and I mean, it was incredible. It was so rich. And then I started going to Green Gulch for Sundays, and I even sat a couple sashins down there. And one time I sat a sashin next to Paul Hawken, and Paul Hawken and I became friends, and he came up to and he was on the Farallones Board of Directors for a while. And
I wasn't aware that Paul sat a sashimi. Good for him. Well, all right. Now there you are, and I know that in the future you go to Japan. So, what year did you go to Japan?
I went to Japan in 81.
81. So you went to Japan pretty soon after living at Farallones,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Now, also I want to know where you met Ryuho Yamada, because you became very close with him, and he and I were close.
Well, I met him in Japan.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Where'd you meet him?
Initially, I met him at his family temple in Kyushu.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he and Shirley had quite a scene going there. And when I finally was able to get some time away from my apprenticeship, I went down there and spent a few days. It was just such a crazy scene. But,
yeah. How'd you know about it?
That's a good question. I can't remember what the introduction was, but they invited me to come.
On places in Japan for Westerners who were interested in Zen, and there were a lot more happening then. than there is now. Now there's very little. And it was in there, and it said, well, if you want to go to a place where you sit up and talk all night, have interesting conversation and drink sake, this is it.
Yeah, no, it was totally wild. And, they were drinking and playing mahjong late into the night, and like they had Jimi Hendrix posters up on the walls, and they were playing, music. But I was a serious Zen student, and I would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they were all hungover because I didn't drink that much. And I'd go into, and his dad, who was blind, would go in and do the entire service. And I'd sit there with him, and he'd go through all the sutras and ring all the bells, and I just like, and he and his mom were incredible leaders in their community. And she would lead him around by the hand because he was blind to talk to people in town. And
you're talking about Ryuho's father.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His father and mother were incredible people. And I felt so honored to spend time with them. And I was in the zendo with his dad every morning. No one else was there. He was such a devoted, beautiful man, very special. And I took a nice picture of them, and when Ruho was dying, because he used to come up here for the enzyme bath, it made him feel a lot better. And there was one of our massage therapists had a really deep affection for him and would take care of him and his wife when he came up to visit to do the enzyme bath. And the last time I saw him, he was really just about gone. And I gave him this picture of his parents that I had taken, and he was so touched by it. I said, "This is what I need right now."
I got him LSD. When he asked me if I could get him LSD, and I wasn't involved with any, I'd stopped taking psychedelics in 1967, but I lived in Sebastopol, and I knew a lot of young people, and so I got him 5 tabs of LSD. It was very cheap, and he really appreciated it. He had 5 trips. But that was actually his colon cancer. He lived a number of years, it seems to me, with it, right?
Yeah, he did. He didn't get treatment until it was really late in the game, unfortunately. But Ruho came here to Osmosis and taught shiatsu.
Oh.
And he was very instrumental in helping here in some key moments. He was present for the original groundbreaking ceremony. He and Maya were here when we broke ground for the prototype in 1985. And then he was also here for the groundbreaking ceremony for the meditation garden, which was a huge event that he officiated. And so we had some really nice crossover happening. And I visited his family temple several times while I lived in Japan.
However, you had difficulty with Ryuho and his wife Mayumi, not to be confused with Mayumi Oda.
Well, Shirley was his wife.
Yeah, Shirley was his wife from years before. But when he was dying, Shirley wasn't with him.
Oh, no. Right, no. Then he was with a Japanese woman at the end of his life.
Mayumi. Right.
Yeah, she was totally devoted to him.
Yeah.
But one of the times he came here, I had this young woman from England who was a massage therapist. She was in her 20s. and they kind of just lit up, and he was totally with her for a while. I can't keep track of it all in time sequence, but that was one chapter.
Wait a minute. Is that before he was with Mayumi?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Years before. Yeah.
She became, after he died, she became very, very bitter about the way he was treated. But they had been very demanding, and so many people helped them, at Jikoji, and I remember visiting him once at a woman's home in Berkeley, and I know you helped them out a lot to an extent that was getting a little bit too much. Are you not remembering this?
No, I am. I mean, when he came here, it was difficult. He was very demanding. When he would visit here, he had high expectations. He wasn't very gracious. And one of the times he came, I had this recording of some chant. I forget which one it was, but I thought it was great, and he hated it. I put it on while they were in the enzyme bath, and I was like, oh my God, he was so offended. It was just like...
Yeah, I never experienced that side of him, but I heard from others. And then, I mean, you were having to pay for them to get massages.
Yeah.
And they weren't. I mean, I remember back then. You don't hold any grudge or anything.
No.
Some people might have.
No, I don't hold any grudge. I mean,
right.
I've been around dying people enough to know that it's so different for every kind of person, and sometimes the kindest people just are having such a terrible time, and they become terrible, and other people who may have not been so kind or wonderful in their lives turn into angels when they're dying, and everything in between.
Yeah. So now you're involved. Tell us about your Zen Renaissance.
My what?
Your Zen Renaissance.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, it started with meeting this guy named Amos Clifford, who started the whole forest bathing movement.
The what? The what movement?
Forest bathing.
Oh. Go on. Explain what that is.
So I kept, it kept showing up in my reading because of the industry I'm in, new trends and forest bathing. And every time I saw it, I kind of, what's this? And I kind of ignored it. And then it was becoming more and more present. Finally, I read about it. And it turns out the guy who was the main founder and started it lived in Santa Rosa. So I just said I could call him up. What's going on here, dude? So he came over, and it turns out he had been a serious Zen guy for a number of years, and then
within what lineage?
I think it was Renzai. He was doing a Zen. He had a Zen thing going in Chico for several years. I think it might have been Renzai, but he had a teacher and he'd had a deep experience, and and he when he turned 60, he really felt like he really wanted to do something to give back, and he got this idea. He read about the forest bathing in Japan and got this whole thing going. And
well, explain what forest bathing is.
So basically, forest bathing is a series of invitations where you, with a group of people, you go into a natural environment and you have a talking stick, and you convene periodically to share your experience, and then you go out and do these different ways of awareness practices, basically in nature. So it's a very slowing down, conscious attunement to opening up your senses to what's happening in the present moment in the natural environment. And part of what the studies of it have shown in Japan that are very scientific is that there's these exudates coming out of trees, and that when you breathe them, they actually have a highly therapeutic effect. So part of it is about what happens when you're in the woods. So he's created this certification program to become a certified forest therapy guide. And I became interested enough in it to sign up for it. It was a 6-month training, and it included a week-long camping experience in Santa Rosa, where the whole thing got started up there in Sugarloaf Park. And I was in the 13th cohort. I think there's been several hundred since then. But it's a global movement of... and it's big in Korea and Japan in particular. But it's kind of a junction point between meditation and being in nature, practicing outdoors. And that was the beginning. That was 2017. And then I ended up organizing a tour of Japan for Amos. And we went over there and went to the home grounds and met some of the main authors and professors who have been studying it for years, and went to the places where the forest bathing tracks had been set up in Japan. And I thought it was going to, well, I still think we're going to implement a forest bathing program as part of what we're doing here at Osmosis. But it became difficult to sustain it. And then I met this teacher. Her name is Susie Harrington, and she's a spirit rock teacher, but she also has her own thing called Desert Dharma, where she takes people on silent retreats in the wilderness. And basically she is a strong proponent of meditating outdoors, is very aligned with the work of Mark Coleman. You know Mark Coleman? Mm-mm. He's one of the spirit rock teachers who's also involved in this. So part of what she does is, and has done for the last 15 years or so, is led a retreat in this very remote farmhouse in Humboldt County, which is in the Mattole Wilderness on the Lost Coast. And the only way you can get in there is to hike 9 miles. And
my goodness.
It's so I went there for a week in 2021, and I was weeping when I left because I so much wanted to stay. You can go for 1, 2, or 3 weeks, and that opened a big door for me. I went back the next year and spent 3 weeks out there. Sitting outside. She's a wonderful Dharma teacher, and she has other teachers that co-teach with her. No, it's Theravada condition, so it's not the Zen avenue, but
it's Theravada.
Yeah. And there's a wonderful cookhouse, and it's just a totally devotional chef who cooks, and then they have a wood-fired hot tub and shower, and you stay in tents. And there's a small airstrip there, and the guy who owns the property flies in the food and your gear for you, so you don't have to carry everything back there. And after the second year, I had a big desire to deepen practice, so I was suggested I sign up for this year-long program at Spirit Rock, which included 3 7-day retreats and a cohort with study every month meetings, and it was really illuminating, actually. And then ironically, the local Zendo here in Grayton got a whole rebirth because Jisoo Warner pursued diligently raising the money to enlarge a building and improve it tremendously, and then Meg Levy came to be the head teacher, and now there's a group of us.
So Jisho is retired.
No, she's still involved. They're kind of they're kind of working together in a beautiful way. It's really inspiring, and there's people who are sitting there every morning. Like you remember Annette?
Oh, sure.
Annette and Barton
Stone. Yeah.
And his wife and
Dave Hazelwood was involved. Did you know him?
Who?
Dave Hazelwood was an early Shunryu Suzuki student in 63, 64. And then he went back and was ordained by Bill Kwong. And, but, after a while he left that. And then he went back and got reordained by Jisho, and became a priest in the Grayton thing. He was older, and he lived in Petaluma. I'd visit him when I was living with John, not that far away,
Is he still with us?
No. Dave Hazelwood, oh God, I don't know how, he died 10 years ago or something. I can't remember. But he was quite interesting. He came out to California with Michael McClure in like the mid-50s.
Oh my God.
Something like that. And Dave Hazelwood was the first person to publish McClure and Philip Whalen. Anyway, he became a priest with Jisho. And I sat with Jisho some when she was in Sebastopol. I would sit with different people. I didn't want to get I didn't want to get any obligations with any group or feel like I had to. So I just go sit now and then with different groups when I was there. But she really made something out of it. I mean, it's quite a successful group.
Yeah, I'm super pleased to have something so nearby with Sangha and a dedicated hall for practice is really a precious thing, and so I'm really appreciating that. And then I've been most moved by. I did a retreat recently. I did 2 retreats last year. Or this year with Gil Fronsdale.
Mm-hmm.
And I really find his way of teaching to be very, very inspiring. Have you heard any of his Dharma talks?
He's set up a formidable group too. What'd you say then?
Have you heard any of his Dharma talks?
Well, yeah, not in a long time. But what do you have to say about it?
I don't know. I could send you one from the retreat I did in October if you like.
Oh, I have access to all that.
Yeah, this is just a particular one that I think is really good.
Oh, that you want to share? Sure.
I'll send it to you. You'd have to give yourself an hour. It's a guided meditation and the third or fourth day of a retreat. But I've listened to it several times. I think it's great.
Well, so here you are. Anybody else you've sat with that or practiced with or that influenced you that you've missed?
No, I'd say that's it. I mean, Kobun was really a very important figure for me, and I sat a lot of sessions with him, and he was really the one who inspired me to go to Japan, actually. I haven't... I think that's... Yeah, as far as, influential, teachers go, Of course, knowing... I mean... I love Bruce and Chris, and I just think they're absolutely fabulous. And we have a close friendship. And
yeah. Well, they're very near Occidental.
Yeah.
And they're both teachers, and they live next door to Ken and Elizabeth Sawyer, who have an Occidental group. I used to sit with them. I used to sit with Bruce in Sebastopol. Chris has another thing going. There's so much happening in that area.
Yeah, it's pretty rich. And Steve and I, work together, more in the garden world. But the last time I saw Steve, he was
Stuckey.
quite... Pardon?
You're talking about Steve Stuckey.
Yeah. I mean, our relationship spans a couple decades, and, he was just an indispensable contributor to the Osmosis field, vibe, energy, and he put so much into the gardens he built here, and we really had a deep understanding of what we were trying to achieve with creating a meditative environment. It was a fantastic collaboration, and very intentional and deep and satisfying, rewarding for both of us. And I invited him here to give a Dharma talk. And it was very hard to schedule him because by that time he was the abbot of San Francisco Zen Center. And, I think it went around for more than a year. And finally, we had a date on the calendar, and I was unsuccessful in promoting it, and I only had a handful of people who were here for the day he came, and by that time he was really sick, and it was before he knew what he had.
Oh.
And so I think we had 4 or 5 people, and they were basically the ladies with blue hair. And I was so embarrassed, like having Steve come here, for that. And for him, it made no difference whatsoever. And he showed up and was so genuine and met them where they were. And it was something, and he obviously was not feeling well at the time, but and he was still so damn curious. I had a book on meditation that was done by some Sufi guy in my bookstore, and I showed it to him, and he wanted that book. He ended up buying it.
Yeah.
A book on breathing by this physiologist, Sufi guy.
Really?
Yeah.
Amazing. You know, one thing you carried there in your osmosis store in Fremantle, which is sort of, I love that area. I love that little bakery there in Fremantle. Is it still there?
Oh yeah, the bakery. Are you kidding? No, it's a big time thing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Uh, and anyway, you used to sell hemisync tapes.
Oh yeah.
Why don't you just explain what hemisync is?
Sure. So HemiSync, we've been using HemiSync for 4 decades now. So when I started osmosis in the mid '80s, there was a big explosion of interest in sound healing, and I went to some event where they had all kinds of exotic devices and equipment, and the thing by far and away that was the most efficacious was the Monroe Institute HemiSync.
Right.
And, Robert Monroe was this guy who was a radio announcer who was quite popular, and he almost died. And he had this out-of-body experience when he was on the operating table, and he was his body was going up in the room and up and up. And then he came back. They brought him back. And it was such a powerful experience for him. He felt like really compelled to see if it was a universal experience or just a one-up. And he ended up writing a book about it. And then he started this institute on the study of out-of-body travel. And so that what these metamusic tapes are the essence of what he learned. And basically, they are made to help guide you on an out-of-body experience. And the way it works is that it intones a slightly different frequency in each ear that's hidden behind the music, so you don't even hear it. And they're out of balance, and the brain automatically syncs them up and makes its own sound right in the middle of your head. And the mind entrains on that sound, and then it systematically lowers down into the lower brainwave activity states of delta and theta. And so it just takes you right into the unconscious and those deep spaces. So, when people do the enzyme bath, got to talk about the enzyme bath. When people do the enzyme bath, they're really opened up. They're very receptive. And so we put them in a room, cover them with a blanket so they can kind of cocoon as that whole metabolic process continues to reverberate in their being. And then we put on the HemiSync, and wow, it takes you away. It really does. So now we have a new version of this. We have the vibroacoustic lounger now, which is the whole progression of evolutions that have happened with sound therapy over the decades. And what this is it's a lounger that tilts you back into perfect zero gravity position, very comfortable. It has 4 80 megawatt transducers in it that are engineered to transmit vibrations into your body. And then the sound, there's 6 different programs you can choose to listen to on a tablet. And each one of them, one of them is emotional release or neo nap or nature immersion. You can choose a different one. And then the sounds are created by this couple who are musicologists, lifelong students of music, and they're very interested in sound healing. This whole project was put together by the CEO of Living Earth Crafts, who's the biggest manufacturer of massage tables on the planet. I know him from the Green Spa Network. So the software is called MindSync, and it organizes the sounds and the vibrations in a very powerful way. And these sessions are 20-25 minutes, and it's a total e-ticket ride. I mean, it takes you to another planet. It's the express train for sure, with no drugs.
Wow.
So that's kind of a new thing that we just put together.
Yeah.
the other new thing that we're introducing for our next year's our 40-year anniversary of introducing the enzyme bath in America. So what we've discovered is that the foundation we've created is really working for people. Most people come here for about 3 hours and get the enzyme bath and a hands-on healing treatment and experience some time in the meditation garden. And it's quite a transformative combination. And what we're realizing is now we have an opportunity to leverage it into an all-day experience. And that's what we're working on right now, is creating a one-day experience where the whole morning is devoted to the Try, Test, and Improve foundation that we've been developing for these 4 decades. And then the afternoon is the gateway into a whole nother level. And we prototyped a bunch of these in the fall with meditation, with forest bathing, with Qigong, different themes for the afternoon session. And so we're mapping out a whole series of these for next year. Right now, that's kind of what's on the table.
Wow. Oh, that's really interesting.
It's
you're having a reopening, an event or something for Osmosis soon or at some point, right?
Well, we're going to have a 40-year anniversary event in May.
In May.
Yeah. And day after tomorrow, we're having a cacao ceremony at sunrise in the meditation garden.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's all I've had today. Usually I start my days with Bali cacao, and I like that.
This is being presented by a ceremonialist who's been studying with shamans in Mexico for 20 years, and it's going to be pretty special. So that's part of our. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't do cacao ceremony. I just have cacao, but I tend to go. I tend not to bring it, and I do this with tea too, as much as possible. Not like bring it by my computer to work, but to go sit and look at the garden while I'm drinking it, and to enjoy the tea. I'm into eating in silence and drinking, enjoying a drink. I was sold on that, being at Zen Center, and Suzuki saying you can't eat and drink at the same time. But at the same time, he didn't want people to get uptight during meals. So if we were eating somewhere else, everybody'd be sitting rigidly, quietly. Then he'd start talking and loosen people up. But cacao has become a welcome part of my life.
Great. I sure enjoy it. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, Michael, do you have anything to say in conclusion? This has really been interesting, and also, it's touched on so much that has been important in my life. I've really enjoyed it.
Me too. Yeah, it's quite a weaving of the crossroads again and again, right? These different touch points. Pretty wonderful. Yeah, and hey, we're still around, which is a pretty big miracle in and of itself.
Yes. I'm grateful for that. And I know, one thing I usually bring up with people, and I haven't with you, and I know how you feel, is what do you think about what's happening with the climate?
God, I mean, there was a tornado in Scotts Valley 2 days ago. A pretty significant one. It tipped over a bunch of cars. Some people were injured. I mean, the video is just incredible. I mean, I think it's terrifying what's happening. I mean, it's almost every week you see a feed coming through on the internet of some river that's never flooded before, floating houses away, or a windstorm leveling a forest, or, and this is like chapter one of what's been predicted for a long time. I don't think
it's been predicted and warned by not by scientists in one field, but in many fields.
Yeah.
It's not like anything that's ever happened. There's so much information on it, so many warnings. And how is the human race responding?
Not well. Not well. Well, I mean, of course, the problem is, the political situation and the economic situation has prevented there from being any kind of a responsible way to deal with it for a long time. I mean, the oil companies knew what was happening in the 70s. They hid it.
They knew in the 50s.
Yeah.
They knew in the 50s, and they started their disinformation campaign back then to undermine anything that could alleviate the situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's really terrifying, and the next few decades they're just going to be unimaginable. Hang on one second. I'm in a podcast interview, but I'll be able to call you back shortly. Will that work? Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, this is part of why, we feel so fortunate here at Osmosis between what just happened with the election, what's happening with AI, what's happening with the climate. People really need refuge.
Mm-hmm.
People really need a place they can come to where they can feel supported in just having an authentic way to connect with themselves, with the natural environment, with people around them. And so this has been our intention from the start here, to create a meditative environment without any jargon. Nobody's having to, take refuge in anything. You just come here, and there's warmth, and there's welcoming, and there's spaciousness, and there's quietude, and there's sanctuary. Mm-hmm. And so whatever is coming, people really need to have a tremendous amount of inner capacity. And hopefully this can be a signal for people to begin to make a commitment to develop that, so that they're going to be able to handle what's coming.
Yeah.
And we feel it. I mean, since COVID, we were shut down for COVID 3 different times for a total of 6 months. It almost finished us off. 25 spas in the Bay Area went out of business, and we would have gone out of business if it wasn't for the PPP program. And
what's that?
That was the government coming in and making money available on who were impacted by COVID, providing substantial loans.
Well, I'm very glad Osmosis survived and still there, and you're there, and you're going to be having this 40-year anniversary, and that you've had a Buddhist revival. That's very interesting. Well, anyway, thanks a lot, Michael.
Yeah, sure.
It's really good being with you.
Good being with you.
I hope we reconnect again.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. No, we gotta. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Well, okay. Thanks a lot. You take care.
You take care as well.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
So thanks a lot, Michael. Michael Stusser. Hey, that was well worth the conversation, Michael. That was great. Well, this reminds me, all my dear friends back in Trump land. I don't know if I'll ever get to you again. I might be on an enemies list. Who knows? Well, this has been a Cuke audio. This has been a Cuke audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dog and Bandita Feline Manis and guest dog and Boom Boo. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.